Hello, Mass Mediaites. I'm sorry for not being in class today, and I'm sorry to send you a video, which is something more that you have to do for the class. However, this will be much shorter than an actual class period will be, and hopefully I'll be slightly less distracted by all the things that I might get distracted in class. I do want to, though, follow up on some of the things that some of you talked about on your threads over the weekend, because some of them really matter as we move forward. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the Hollywood simulation. Y'all did a nice job of making connections between the podcast and some of the things that happened during the simulation. Many of you had great insights. Several of you who are writers recognized that writers kind of had a structural disadvantage in this game, and you're right. The game is actually designed to keep writers from all getting work, which is terrible, right? But this has to do with something that's actually real in the industry, and that is that the percentage of people who decide to become writers in Hollywood versus the number of people who actually end up getting paid and staying in Hollywood as writers is incredibly small. In fact, it's more likely that you will be a college athlete and get to play in the NFL, and as you know, that percentage is very low, but it's still higher than if you emerge from college hoping to be a screenwriter in Hollywood. Your chances are just very low. It's a pretty elite group of people. The Writers Guild of America, there's one in the East and one in the West that works on behalf of those people. Now, another interesting thing about the industry that this simulation doesn't address at all is the idea that actors also have a very difficult time making it in Hollywood. In fact, everybody who lives in Hollywood says, "Oh, I'm an actor, but I do this for my day job." And that's an exaggeration, but it's true that actors are also, even the thousands of actors who do make a living through acting, who live and work in Hollywood, but who will never be able to open a movie like the Hugh Jackson and Vin Petrol and Kate, what was her name, in the simulation. These actors are anomalies, and so. However, the point of the simulation is to help you think about the way that those actors being attached to a certain project really does matter. And some of you made nice connections between other media texts in the threads, and I really appreciated that. I think Ashley actually mentioned that the screenwriters who wrote the movie that she was talking about wrote the movie for Ryan Reynolds. And that's really smart, because if you know Ryan Reynolds and you know that he's looking for a particular kind of story, and then you're able to actually get him to say yes to your story, that's a guarantee that that movie is going to get made, because Ryan Reynolds has been such a profitable actor in the last decade. So thanks again for your hard work on processing that simulation. I also want to talk a little bit about the 5 steps. Y'all were applying those really well, and there were 2 places that we had consistent missteps. So let me tell you about those 2 places. One of them is content aggregators. Many of you got this right, but a content aggregator is a company that makes it their job to know very well a particular audience, so specific audiences, and then to channel particular forms of content to that person. Now, in the good old days, maybe if we talk about television, we think about cable, when cable television was the norm, and that was probably while you were kids, right? We saw the proliferation of many channels with very specific tastes associated with it. Radio has a very similar kind of way that it works, as do magazines, newspapers. They know their audience. Sometimes their audience is bounded by locality. That would be for, obviously, newspapers, local newspapers, regional newspapers. Often, though, they're bounded by professional interests, like a deer hunting magazine or an auto mechanics magazine. And then sometimes they're based on age considerations or specific kinds of hobbies. You get the idea. So content aggregators are those companies that gather content and package them for those audiences. So that means that Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, though they fulfill a similar function, they are a kind of grid that audiences can use to make decisions about what to watch. they're not actually content aggregators, because those two sites are kind of like encyclopedias of what's available and give us a little bit more information about them. They don't actually package them for a particular audience. And the other one that was a little bit of a misstep was the hardware manufacturers. And the hardware manufacturers really focuses on the hardware that's used in order to deliver the content. So that does not include the production equipment, like the lighting, for instance, or the sound recording equipment, if we're talking about music. It really refers primarily to the idea of computers and radios and DVD players back in the day, and vinyl, all those delivery mechanisms, paper, book binding, those kinds of things. So a few of you had a misstep there. Now, many of you had many other awesome insights about the 5 steps and how industrial processes shape meanings. And I want to talk about a few of those. I'm not going to talk about all of you who had great insights, but I did notice a few trends, and I've jotted a few notes, and I want to comment on a few of the things that y'all said, because they're very helpful in terms of what we're going to be talking about going forward. Oh, and now I magically have glasses on, because I won't be able to read my notes if I don't have glasses on. So one of the insights that I thought was really helpful was the way that marketing sometimes can shape the way that a text actually works. So you came up with a couple different ones that I thought were very interesting. One was Mariah's insights about how Taylor Swift, as many of you know, recently had the rights from most of her early catalog bought away from her. And so that they can sort of be covered by whoever wants to, and they can be used in whatever context that the new owner has. And so in her new contract, she has the rights. And Mariah was just talking about the fact that marketing about her new album, Lover, has focused on the fact that Taylor has her own rights. And this is especially effective because we live at a moment when people suddenly care that women have equal power, or closer to equal power, in Hollywood. And Taylor's not in Hollywood, she's in Nashville, or I don't know where Taylor lives right now. But I thought that was a great insight about how marketing can actually shape the content or the product itself. Another one was that Connor talked about something similar, and that is Kanye owning this new production, because Kanye owns everything. Because Kanye, like Taylor, is one of the top grossing musicians of our time. But as a result, this allows Kanye to have this authentic voice. That was the point that Connor was making about Kanye, that like this authenticity is something that Americans really like, and so it's a way that the production process actually shapes the reception of the content. And Faith had a great insight that was very different than the other two, and that was the idea that Panic at the Disco made a cover of one of the Frozen 2 songs, and she very correctly suggested that this was a carefully made contract between Disney and Panic at the Disco, both of whom have a real strong interest in developing crossover audiences between their two texts. And this notion of crossover audiences is something that a few others of you talked about too. And it's a marketing technique that's happening all the time, and I'll mention it again in a few minutes. The second one that I wanted to mention was something that only one person really talked about, but that is genre. Zach talked about the idea that when the producers decided to market Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as a drama, that immediately secures a particular group of people in terms of the audience. And that's absolutely true, and true of every media text that any of you talked about, but Zach was the one who surfaced that important industrial reality. The truth is that the industrial norms that shape any genre constrain in really significant ways the way that any of the artists or the producers work within that genre. They have to attend to genre expectations. Sometimes they can subvert the genre expectations, but they at least have to acknowledge that they understand them and that they're doing what they should be with them. Episodic flow was something that Zane brought up when he talked about the Netflix show that he had written his first paper about. And the fact that there were 3 episodes, he suggested to the audience, especially the audience who liked this particular show, that there may be more later. There may be like another season. And these notions of the number of episodes and the idea of a season being released have all been kind of turned on their head with the way that Netflix works, as we all know. But he's very right that like the choice of breaking that show into 3 episodes is a way of nodding toward a previous genre, but also hinting that they could possibly have another spin-off series or another series of 3 episodes or more episodes. This is increasingly common in the streaming era. The other episodic flow, it's kind of an episodic flow concern, but it's also related to marketing, is in Becca Portillo's analysis of The Bachelor. She talked about the ways that there are kind of elements from old Bachelor seasons that recur in new Bachelor seasons, and occasionally after a Bachelor and Bachelorette find each other, they go on a spin-off, and the audience follows them there. So these elements of sequential flow and spin-offs and opportunities for continuing an audience to consume, these are absolutely ways that industrial strategy are shaping the content. Another thing that many of you talked about, well, a few of you talked about, was music videos. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I liked the way that Lexi talked about how in Taylor's music video for You Need to Calm Down, is that the name of the song? At the very end of the song, she advocates for the Senate signing the Equality Act in the music video. But during the music video, she includes a lot of LGBTQ pop icons. And the use of those pop icons brings a whole specific audience. And again, it's sort of almost like the artist is deploying a strategy that's related to content aggregation. Now, artists are never content aggregators, but the idea that artists and the people that are working behind that artist are thinking about what's a way that we can bring in a new audience is exactly how the strategies work. Emmy also talked about the idea that in the music video she talked about, the video really nuanced the meaning of the song. And I know that all of you have experienced many, many songs where once you watch the video, you kind of took a whole different thing from it. And that whole different or new thing isn't necessarily the idea that the artist had in mind, but what it does is it adds another layer of meaning. So the more layers of meaning that it has, again, the wider audience it can possibly reach. And Seneca also did a great job in being very explicit in her Post Malone analysis about the fact that a lot of times when a music producer makes a decision about the music video, they don't think about it in terms of content. Instead, they think about what's going to serve the mass interests of this video, like what's going to make more people come to this. And the sentence that she wrote about it in her post is like an exquisitely crafted sentence, so I do recommend it. Finally, many of you talked about Netflix. Specifically, Ashley and Luke talked about the fact that just having content behind a paywall changes who gets to see it. It encourages everybody to buy their Netflix. And I think that was really great. And then Rachel even talked about the idea that a niche audience, which is not just a Netflix thing, is one strategy for industrial success. So adult cartoons, she was talking about Rick and Morty, have content that's adult in nature. But in doing so, they actually encourage a particular audience. They don't just discourage children from watching, but they encourage other people to watch the actual show. So you had a bunch of great stuff to say. When we get back together, we're going to talk a little bit about regulation in the media industries over history, and we're going to talk about how those things have changed. And that will be preparing you for the documentary film that you're going to watch this weekend for Web Enhanced Weekend, which is called Merchants of Cool. And that's all that I have to say to you right now. You don't have a reading due for Wednesday, I don't think. If it turns out that you do, I'll erase this part of the content. Thanks again, and I apologize for not being with you today.